It's 18th of January 2021. Thank you for joining us on Frontier Opening Bell. I'm Temple Ashaju. With us this morning, we've got Ali Kansachu, the CEO and founder of Rich Frontiers Management of Nairobi, Kenya. Thank you for joining us on the program. And Joshua Odebisi, the banking analyst at Vetiver Capital Management. Thank you for joining us, gentlemen, on the show. Bosun Omofaye, the chief executive officer and executive editor of Frontier Africa Reports, is also with us on the program. Quickly, let's look at how we ended the markets last week, beginning from Nigeria, where the weekly performance for the Nigerian Stock Exchange was positive, up some 2.63%. Ivory Coast, which represents the BRVM, the Francophone markets, was down on Friday by some 0.76%. Egypt, the Egyptian Stock Exchange, was positive week to date, 4.58%, while the Nairobi Stock Exchange in Kenya slipped by some 0.04% on Friday. And South Africa on Friday was down some 52 basis points as well. Now let's look at some of the stories in the macroeconomic fronts, where Kenya revenue agency, that's KRA collection, hit some 166 billion Kenyan shillings. That represents so 101% growth as of December 2020. The UK Africa Trade Investment Conference is to hold this week, 20th, that's Wednesday specifically. AfDB-EIB unveiling some joint cooperative action plan for January 20. And of course, Ethio Telecom is to launch a mobile banking service following the approval that they got from the central bank there, the regulator there. And Oromia International Bank, so profits up some 15% to 860.5 million birr for the 2019-2020 calendar year. Ali, let's get you to look at some of these stories for us. What do you make of the improvements that we've seen in the collection rates for Kenya, as reported by the KRA?
So obviously that was a very positive outcome at a time when we had a sequence of negative outcomes, in that the revenue take has been sharply lower because of the impact of COVID and related lockdowns and the slowdown in the economy. So that, I think, is a positive outcome. I think it might have had something to do with the year-end, companies looking to normalize their books, and that might have helped bump up that number. But this is a number everyone is keeping a very close eye on, Temple, because it's been missing the mark for a while. That this is on the revenue collection side. Obviously, the spending side is another issue entirely. UK Africa, look, Boris Johnson has been very bullish about the Africa-UK connection, the Commonwealth connection, and in a post-Brexit environment, we should expect to see more of this level of commitment coming out of the United Kingdom. So I think that's a positive step forward. We'd obviously like to see results come out of that. African Development Bank and EIB, there seems to be a much bigger level of coordination between European multilateral banks, EBRDs also in that group, and the likes of the AfDB and others. And I think this is also a promising and positive development. So far, we've seen the EBRD push very hard in North Africa, and I think this is looking to extend that footprint across sub-Saharan Africa as well, and using the African Development Bank as the platform of choice. Obviously, before we touch on Ethio Telecom and Oromia International Bank, one's got to contextualize a very, very volatile situation. Still ongoing in Tigray province, reports of mass starvation, and a lot of reports. There was the assassination of a very well-respected foreign minister, and then we got the complexity of a military build-up between Sudan and Ethiopia as well at the border. This is in this flashpoint area where the Sudanese have previously delineated but not enforced the border, and they seem to be doing that now. In that context, the development that Ethio Telecom is launching banking services, it's a no-brainer for a telecom in a country like Ethiopia, because more people, of course, have a phone than they do a bank account, and this is a unique opportunity. And I think one that Safaricom was also targeting. So it will be interesting in the context of Safaricom and M-Pesa's potential entry into Ethiopia. Might they now pivot towards partnering with Ethio Telecom rather than starting a fresh field, applying for a fresh license? We'll have to see how that develops. The Oromia performance is very good in the context that there's been a lot of instability in Oromia, as you know. So that's an interesting performance, and if you get some stability, you might see quite a performance coming out of that particular banking institution. And just finally, you touched on the Nairobi Stock Exchange in your previous slide. We've had a strong start to the year. We're up about 2.5% on the Nairobi All Share. This has been largely a story about Safaricom's outperformance. We touched an all-time high last week as investors came back and snapped up what is the biggest capitalization stock at the stock exchange, around 57%. I think investors are looking through the M-Pesa price reduction, which has now been normalized, and that's encouraged buyers into that particular stock.
Quite a lot to actually chew in that space, actually, given all of those details that you've churned out for us, Ali. Bosun, do you want to have a go with anything around the Ethiopian telecom to launch a mobile banking service as well?
Well, I think what the Ethio Tel is trying to do is to be prepared before the government conclude the privatization. I think it's a whole lot of quick repositioning. Vodafone is interested, Huawei is interested, Safaricom from Kenya is interested. So it looks like Ethio Tel is trying to ramp up its size and its foothold before the privatization comes, whoever gets whatever percentage that the government will finally decide. But I think they're just in very good direction. And look at the population of Ethiopia, about 100 million plus or so. So it's a very big market. I'm sure they are learning from how Safaricom has been able to make a whole lot of money, hold down the whole lot of East Africa, and I think they're positioning themselves in the same corridor.
Okay, great. So let's move on to West African markets, where the Nigerian Stock Exchange is to hold its yearly briefing for 2020 tomorrow. Of course, they will also give an outlook for 2021. Access Bank's 2021 Investment Engagement Forum is also holding tomorrow, January 2021, 19th specifically. Heirs Holdings buys some 45% of OML 17 related assets for $1.1 billion. We all know who owns Heirs Holdings. That's Tony Elumelu, who also has a footprint in Transcorp Nigeria PLC. Then you have CBN, Central Bank of Nigeria, looking to unveil the 2021 strategies in a few days' time. BRVM, Central Depository Settlement Bank, names BRVM Diop as the Deputy Managing Director. And Congo is looking to list some 4 public companies on the Central African Securities Exchange. I'll start with you, Joshua. What do you make of Heirs Holdings' purchase of 45% of OML 17? This is an asset belonging to Shell and I think a couple of other JVs at this point in time. Now that Heirs Holding is getting into it, and we're talking about the shift from crude oil consumption to electric cars and all of that, is this a good investment decision coming at the right time or not?
Well, I think before we even analyze it as an investment decision on the part of Heirs Holdings, I think we need to look at it as, a divestment decision by Shell, because it's pointing towards a sort of, a growing trend of these international oil companies exiting the Nigerian market. It's sort of, a continuing trend, an ongoing engagement, really. So overall, I think what this says is, not only is the viability, but also the profitability of our markets for international oil companies is no longer where it was, a couple of decades ago. And obviously the shift towards more local control, more local content is to be expected. Now with Heirs Holdings, I think overall the strategy makes sense. Control of OML 17 will give Tulelumu's company, a pretty significant, jump in oil supply at crude supply. So this will be, positive going forward. With regards to, demand for crude, the thing is that even if the rest of the world is moving towards electric cars, Nigeria and the African continent in general is very far behind, a few decades behind on that front. Before we're going to see anything close to the penetration we've seen for electric cars in some European countries, we'll probably be getting to the end of this century if we're being completely honest. So the truth is there will still always be demand, especially on the African continent and in the developing world, for crude and for crude products. But obviously the Western world will no longer be at the forefront of that. So we'll be looking towards our neighbors, towards the Asian market, really, to be selling our crude and our products. But the truth is, what we need to also focus on, or what we need to remember, is that all this crude that we're extracting, if we are refining it and selling the refined products, we're getting more value, than just selling the crude at, I don't know what the current price is, nothing under, $50-something per barrel, when we can sell all the different products, derivatives, PMS and all its derivatives for so much more than that, and get, more value. And I think that really should be where we're looking to go in, the near future.
Ali, let me come to you with 4 of the public companies in Congo that will be getting listed on the Central African Securities Exchange. I mean, what's the lesson to learn from that for a lot of other countries that are yet to list their state-owned enterprises on their exchanges?
Well, not to be too extreme about it, I think it's criminal economic negligence that countries are not embracing this strategy, because it's a double win. You make your companies more efficient, you bring greater scrutiny to them, and they start paying you dividends without you having to support them. So I'm impressed that Congo are going forward with this idea. I think the lesson is sell them cheap, encourage your citizens to take ownership, make sure your citizens have a profit, don't be greedy, because if you are greedy, you stop the pipeline, and you will increase the ownership society. I mean, I saw this under Mrs. Thatcher in Great Britain in the 1980s, and it's sometimes so depressing that it takes us so long to embrace stuff which is just so self-evident. So I think this is a great idea, and either countries will do it of their own volition, or they'll be forced to do it because of the economic situation that they find themselves in.
But you raised a very valid point, Ali. But do you think it's a question of investments, knowledge, or investment education, or it is just pure ignorance at this point in time?
I think what it is, it's a political problem in that a lot of state-owned enterprises are boondogs for the politicians. You can stuff it to the gills with your mates. You can do all kinds of things which you will not be able to do if they're properly managed. And I think therefore it's more of a political issue that you've got to just break through that. It's like the African Free Trade Agreement. That was also a breakthrough, because again, there were people within countries who will not benefit from a free trade agreement. And it's a similar story, I think, with these state-owned enterprises. Wherever you care to look, I mean, you don't have to be a rocket scientist to see whether it's in South Africa, whether it's in Nigeria, whether it's Kenya, they're not well managed. Here you can import the best human capital, you can increase the amount of product you're doing, and really you can turn these businesses around. And I would say, embrace this. This is the future, frankly.
Okay, Bolson, anything to say to this particular development before we quickly touch on the events for this week, the NSE yearly performance of 2020, and the outlook they're looking to give tomorrow for 2021?
Well, I think Ali and covered the listings program very well. I know that the Ghanaians next door to Nigeria are also planning to do about 16 of the state-owned enterprises, trying to unbundle them on the Ghana Stock Exchange. That news came about a month or two ago towards the end of last year. They're working it out. They're going to do not just 4, but close to 20. I think that is the way to go. I think one other country in North Africa, I'm not sure whether between Algeria or Tunisia, is also looking at this whole boarding that state-owned enterprises have become a drain pipe on annual budget, and they're just tired of funding them. So Ali is spot on when he said, look, we are behind the curve by about 30 years. We should have done this in the 80s. Nigerian Airways could have been saved, by the way, wouldn't have gone down the drain. Perhaps Kenya Airways would have been in a better position. South African Airways could have been in a better position. NNPC could have been in a better position. Nigeria's national shipping line could have been in a better position, couldn't have sunk. Nigeria Airways had about 35 aircraft at a point. We had about how many ocean-going vessels under the NNSL? So in the 80s was when we would have gone this route. Perhaps it's never late than never that we have so many bad assets on our books right now that are not productive to the government. That just every budget just goes straight into this non-productive state-owned enterprises, and we just keep funding a bottomless pit. But to come to the week to just save time around I think we'll hear from the stock exchange on tomorrow. It will be going to be a good one to hear about the future. I'm more interested in the demutualization process and where they are and when there will be a final closure on it. They are doing it. They are unveiling a few things almost on a daily basis. But they need to give us, the NSC need to give us a sunset clause. You can't do this endlessly because GTB wants to do a holdco, and they came out with a plan, and there's a deadline to it. They're going to finish it up in Q1. The stock exchange cannot do a demutualization that does not have a deadline. I'm sorry, with due respect, they have to give us a deadline to say, look, it's going to be June, half year, December, so that we know what to look forward to. It shouldn't be as an open-ended program that could just go on endlessly. Number two, I like the Access Bank. Access Bank investors engagement I think Access Bank would want to reveal more about their program with the Cavmont in Zambia. They will want to say a whole lot more about how they are positioning for AFCFT and all of that. I think we'll be keeping an eye on that here on Frontier Africa Reports. Thank you.
Joshua, we talked about, Bosin hinted about Access Bank. Now it's something that they will want to give some kind of guidance about as to what they will be implementing in that area this year, 2021. But this is a country, Zambia, that is currently challenged by debts. They've been unable to pay their debts. We've seen the takeover by Chinese, and this is also a country that UBA had been before with a commercial bank, but it looks like they pulled out at the end of the day. What are the opportunities that we're likely to have, or how positive can that terrain be for Access Bank?
Well, like you mentioned, it's already a bit of there's already a bit of a precedent with, other banks and other companies trying to launch into that market. I don't know what the difference will be with Access Bank, to be honest. We don't know what their own, what their own different strategy will make of the whole situation. But I think obviously it's quite apparent that Access Bank's main focus is on expanding across the continent and becoming Africa's #1 bank, as they say. Now obviously we look forward to hearing from their management on exactly the steps that they will take this year, whether it will involve, more mergers and acquisitions, whether it will just be, consolidating what they already have on ground and expanding that to get to the point that they're trying to get to. But whatever it may be, I think it's obviously very exciting because, they are taking on a whole structure with a very, very different focus from GT Bank. GT Bank are diversifying their business lines across different, industries, while Access Bank are staying within the banking space firmly, but expanding across different countries. Now, obviously, what that's going to lead to, I cannot, say 100% just yet. But after this presentation, we'll have, a clearer idea of what direction all these are going to follow.
All right, thanks a great deal, Joshua. Let's quickly look at the headlines we have from Southern Africa, and we'll look at the African Union's vaccines, the millions of vaccines purchased that to be distributed per country's population. says the president of South Africa, Cyril Ramaphosa. He also mentioned that Pfizer, Johnson & Johnson, AstraZeneca vaccines will be ready this year. And of course, SA miners have now ramped up plans or are ramping up plans to support the vaccination or inoculation of some 18,000 people with their current health infrastructure. Ali, how possible can this be for Africa with the millions of doses of vaccines, COVID-19 vaccines already purchased by the African Union?
So I think, this is the right approach for the continent. We need to consolidate our buying through the African Union or the African Development Bank. This is the only approach that makes sense. It extracts a lower price because of the volume. Countries which are trying to do bilateral deals are going to come sadly unstuck. So I think this is another example of how we are stronger together than we are apart, and particularly in what remains a pandemic year. We've seen a big surge since the beginning of the year, tapering a little bit now, but I think this is exactly the correct approach, and I commend the African Union for taking leadership in this situation, and I would like more of our Pan-African institutions to do the same. I think AfDB-EIB Bank was making a $4 billion facility available amongst other players. With respect to South Africa, the miners also the capacity to vaccinate 18,000 people a day. That's pretty impressive, because obviously that if you think about mining, it's in a very dense underground environment, and the risk of COVID spreading is quite high there. So I think that's good to hear, but I think they've got to do more rapid fire testing in those mines. Otherwise, you could potentially have issues going forward.
Okay. Joshua, at what point do you think we will be able to start seeing results, or by way of impact on the economy, if we start vaccinating more enough? Do you think we will see some results on Q1 or Q2?
Well, okay, so obviously at the moment there are very few plans, at least I know in Nigeria there are very few plans with regards to any kind of vaccination to go, in Q1 at least. But I mean, if, hypothetically speaking, we were to begin vaccinations tomorrow and really roll it out to the major places, I'm talking Lagos and Abuja specifically, I think we would, be back at full operation pretty much in no time. Now, I think this can be, reflected across. Yeah, we can just extrapolate this to other countries in Africa. I think it won't take time, because just the fact that there are vaccines on ground will sort of create the impression within people that it is okay to go out already. So they will sort of preempt even receiving the vaccines to just return to sort of normal activity, because I think people are somewhat itching to get out there. But I know that unfortunately that's not going to happen, because I don't know how the rollout is going to be this year at all. I don't know if we're going to even see, a mass rollout anytime before, the second half of the year, really, or more realistically in 2022, unfortunately.
I think the UK should cross some 4 million vaccinated or inoculated individuals this week, because as at weekend they had actually crossed 3.5 million. That is something that we do hope that before the end of this month, the African countries actually should start getting its individuals or their individual inoculated as well. Let's finalize quickly now with the Northern African stories. Of course, Egypt, where we have the fintech startup Casbana raising some $1 billion pre-seed funding from venture capital, Disruptech, and of course a couple of other angel investors. Transport company Wasalat Misir is to invest some £2 billion into its expansion plans. South Sudan signed a deal to double oil output for 3 years, and TSE, which is a Tunisia stock exchange now, listed companies to file their financial statements for January 2021. This is Wednesday. Bosun, would you want to share your understanding of the Casbana firm, the startup that has now raised some $1 billion in pre-seed funding?
I think we'll continue to see some of these money will always find where it is best suited. Once the environment is, the business case is right, the environment is right, and the money will always find its way there. A number of countries in Africa's jurisdiction are not attracting funding because the environment is not right. It's a very simple, like Ali said at some point during the conversation, you don't have to be a rocket scientist to know that money flows to where it's going to be accepted. I think that is just the point. But I think I want to see, I love the cooperation perhaps which is beginning to happen between Sudan and South Sudan, which was a breakaway republic, on how they can cooperate on how to leverage the oil resources rather than use it to divide and cause more problem, wars and insurrections, and begin to have a whole large number of folks who are led into poverty and things of that nature, refugees to be more specifically, and all of that. I think we should just get out of this resource cost issue in Africa, and I don't think Sudan and South Sudan should add to that blacklist or something that blotched the whole of Africa almost everywhere where you have a natural resource. Thank you.
Ali, do you think South Sudan and Sudan's cooperation is coming, this sort of a deal is coming rather late? Because if you look at what's been happening in the oil space, it's currently being challenged by lots of deaths, COVID-19, low price of crude oil. Again, if you look at the emergence of the electric cars and of course alternative renewable energies, do you think this deal is coming rather late at this point in time, or basically these all challenges is forcing them to sit tight, just as we are beginning to see across all of the oil-rich countries?
So a very interesting point. I think in the medium and long term, obviously the oil market is facing some serious challenges. We know that. But I think in this particular case, it's interesting to see this rapprochement. And I think a lot of the friction was because of Bashir, the dictator who fell last year, and his attitude towards South Sudan. And I think the new regime in Khartoum has dialed down that very aggressive rhetoric. And I think this will be a positive development. Both countries are short of cash. South Sudan is short of cash big time. I don't think they've run out of electricity because they can't pay the power bill. So, they need to look at any solution right now. And finally, the oil out of South Sudan and the oil in the north is actually quite cheap to extract. So, they do make a reasonable turn once they get the oil pumping.
All right, thank you so very much for that analysis. Thanks a great deal, gentlemen, for being a part of Frontier Opening Bell this morning. Thank you, Ali Kansachu, CEO and founder of Rich Frontiers Management. It's Nairobi, Kenya. Appreciate your insight. Joshua Odebisi, banking analyst with Vertical Capital Management. Thanks a great deal for sharing your thoughts on some of these headlines that we had this morning. Bosin Omofaye, executive editor and CEO of Frontier Africa Reports. Appreciate your insight as well. I'm Temple Ashaju. This has been Frontier Opening Bell. Do have a wonderful week ahead. Bye for now.